This video is brought to you by the sleek and durable K70 RGB TKL Championship Series keyboard. Experience the lightning fast response times of its Cherry MX speed switches and flip on tournament mode to help you focus up during raid. With its detachable USB-C cable, you can even take it to the moon. Find your typing way with 10% off using code MISTECH at Corsair.com. Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for Asphodelos, the 4th Circle Savage. This is the 4th Savage raid encounter made available in the Pandemonium raid series in Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker. This video covers the second part of the Hesperos encounter after the checkpoint. If you're looking for part 1, be sure to follow the link in the description below. My name is MizTech and I'll be your raid guide. We begin by pulling the boss to the center of the room. Searing Stream will deal high raid-wide damage, healers beware. The boss will then cast Acanthai Act 1 and give you your first taste of the general idea behind this encounter. To give you a quick overview of these mini phases, the boss will always give you a preview of the incoming set of mechanics during each Acanthai Act cast. Players can use this brief time to identify what type and where on the platform these mechanics will be coming from. At the end of each mini phase cast, each previewed mechanic will be replaced by these thorns. The boss will then cast Wreath of Thorns and tether each mechanic thorn on the platform in a specific order. The mechanics will then resolve in the same order that the boss indicated by the tethers, and players will need to adjust accordingly. In Act 1, players will have to deal with 8 sets of absorb towers at the inner and outer intercardinals, and massive circle AoEs originating from each cardinal point. The order indicated by Wreath of Thorns will always be either the east and west or the north and south AoE circle blasts going off first. Then, all 8 absorb towers will go off. Finally, the remaining east and west or north and south AoE circle blasts will go off. To handle this, we assign a player to each intercardinal absorb tower. Then, as soon as we identify the first set of circle AoE explosions, all players will split into the safe zones in between the blasting AoEs closest to their assigned towers. As soon as the first set of blasts go off, players can quickly stand on their assigned thorns to absorb their tower blasts. Once these go off, they can then quickly run into the safe zone in between the final 2 AoE circle blasts. Next up, the boss will cast Near or Far Sight. This will deal massive damage to the 2 players standing either closest or furthest to the boss respectively. To handle this, we have the tanks bait each attack with cooldowns, while the rest of the raid moves opposite to them. Next up, Acanthai Act 2 will begin and you'll preview alternating sets of 4 exploding AoE circles and 4 absorb towers at each cardinal point. The explosions will always appear on the relative right side of the cardinal, while the absorb towers are on the left. Next up, the boss will target the primary target with Demigod Double, a lethal tank buster. The active tank can use their immunity here to survive and save cooldowns for the near and far sight busters instead. The boss will then cast Wreath of Thorns and activate 1 mechanic from each set at the cardinals. The pattern will always have the opposite AoE circle blasts and opposite absorb towers resolving at the same time. This forms one of 2 possible patterns, one where the north and south AoE circles are going off at the same time, and one where the east and west goes off at the same time. These patterns are essentially the same, just rotated 90 degrees, and player movements relative to these initial blasts are identical. To further complicate things, all players will be marked up and tethered together at the end of the cast, and players will need to resolve these mechanics on top of dancing around the thorn AoEs and absorb towers. Let's take a closer look. Each tether, when pulled apart, will break, and depending on the color of the crystal above the players' heads, a specific type of damage will occur. 1 tank and 1 healer will be tethered together with orange fire crystals above their heads. The other tank and healer will also be tethered, but the healer will have a purple lightning crystal above their head while the other tank has nothing. 2 damage dealers will be tethered together with orange fire crystals, while the other 2 are tethered together with 2 light blue wind crystals. When the purple lightning crystal tether is pulled apart, it will deal raid-wide damage and afflict everyone with the 3-second magic fallen down debuff. When the orange fire crystal tethers are pulled apart, affected players will be targeted for massive AoE damage that must be shared. The 2 blue wind crystal tether players must stay together until the tether disappears, or you will die. Immediately after the tethers appear, the boss will begin to cast Dark Design. This will place a baitable circle AoE marker underneath all players. As soon as the Dark Design circles explode, the thorn towers and circles will begin to resolve. Now that we know what is happening in this massive glut of mechanics, let's take a close look at what each player is responsible for. There are many different ways to handle this phase, but this guide will only focus on how our group did it. The first step is identifying what room you have available to you based on the first set of thorn circle blasts and absorb towers. Again, these can either resolve first in the north and south or east and west. Since the relative movement of each player is exactly the same regardless of which set goes off first, I will explain this movement as if the first set of safe zones are relative north and south. During the Wreath of Thorns cast, all players will loosely spread around the boss so that they can quickly and easily identify the crystals above their heads. As soon as the tethers are out, the tank and healer tethered together with the purple lightning crystal will immediately run north and south to break their tether as soon as possible, while also baiting their dark design circles slightly to the left of the absorbed tower thorns. The tank tethered with the orange fire crystal will stand on the south side of the boss, while all other players will stack on the north side of the boss inside the hitbox to bait dark design circles in a controlled manner. Once the purple tether is destroyed and all dark design circles are out, players can dodge them while moving into the next positions. The purple tank and healer will rotate clockwise to stand in the absorbed tower next to them. When soaking this tower, make sure you're on the inside of the triangle marker on the platform, as the circle AoE explosion slightly overlaps with the tower. The entire raid will stack up and move into the safe section on the north side, while the orange tank moves directly opposite them to the south to break their orange tank healer tether. Since the entire group is sharing the damage in the north with the healer, the damage on the group isn't too bad to handle. In the south, the tank will be taking the shared damage stack alone with cooldowns and tank privilege. As soon as this first set of absorbed towers and AoE circle explosions go off, everyone can rotate into the next set of safe zones. The original purple tank and healer will again soak the absorbed towers clockwise to their starting position. The players with blue wind crystals and one of the remaining orange fire crystal players will rotate clockwise and stack together in the safe zone away from that absorbed tower. The other orange fire player will move opposite this group and meet up with the original orange tank and healer to stack up and share the damage for the second orange tether break. As this second set of tower absorbs and AoE circles explosions resolve, the blue wind tether will disappear and the boss will begin to cast Ultimate Impulse, marking the end of Act 2. This will deal massive raid-wide damage, cooldown, and heal as necessary. Acanthai Act 3 will then begin. In this preview, we see a total of 8 absorbed towers, 2 sets of 4 on the east and west edges of the platform, and a knockback indicator from the very center of the room. The boss will cast Wreath of Thorns and tether to one set of absorbed towers at a random edge. He will then tether to the knockback indicator in the center before tethering the 4 absorbed towers on the opposite edge. Immediately after, he will begin to cast Asphodelos kick. This will have him leaping on top of the player furthest from him, dealing high damage and knocking back any other player hit in the process. To bait this, we have our off-tank stand at max melee on the side of the boss opposite the first set of absorbed towers, while the rest of the raid hangs out on the other side inside the boss's hitbox. While waiting, we have our 4 ranged players fan out around the boss to be ready to run inside their assigned absorbed towers immediately after the jump. Once the boss jumps, the 2 melee and the other tank will move to the other side of the boss and fan out in his hitbox. The boss will soon target the 3 closest players with cleave attacks that cannot be overlapped, and these 3 players will bait this while the off-tank moves back towards the center. The first set of absorbed towers and the 3 cleaves towards the 3 closest players will resolve at the same time. Immediately after, all players will use their knockback immunity to negate the knockback from the center of the arena and allow them to quickly move into position for the next set of mechanics. The off-tank will again bait Asphodelos kick. The rest of the raid hangs out inside his hitbox with the same raged players ready to run into their absorbed towers after the kick. The other 3 melee will follow the boss and position themselves on the outside of his hitbox to bait the 3 cleave attacks to the outer edge of the arena. This marks the end of this act. Next up, the 2 tanks will need to be ready for another near or far sight double tank buster. The raid will need to adjust as well to ensure the 2 tanks are either the 2 closest or furthest players to the boss. Heart Stake is a 2-part tank buster that will target the first enmity target for a spicy bleed, and the second enmity target with a heavy hit. In our group, we prefer to have one tank take both hits, so healers can focus heals on one target. To do so, we have the second tank provoke during the cast, while the initial tank uses cooldowns to handle all of the damage. Next up, Acanthai Act 4 will begin. In this preview, you'll notice 4 absorbed towers near the intercardinal points of the arena and 4 massive AoE circle explosions at each cardinal. The boss will cast another Searing Stream to heal through before Wreath of Thorns. This cast will mark up all players with either a purple or a blue tether. Blue tethers will be attached to the absorbed towers, while purple tethers are attached to the massive circle blasts. When a linked player dies or breaks a tether during this phase, the linked mechanic thorn will resolve, and an extra mechanic on the player will also occur. Blue players will be hit by a large AoE circle attack that cannot be overlapped, while purple players will deal high raid-wide damage that will also apply a brief debuff, meaning they'll need to break their tethers one by one in a controlled manner. Before the raid moves away to begin breaking tethers, the boss will cast another Searing Stream, and players should wait to be topped off before moving out. First, we have all players linked with blue tethers move opposite and clockwise 1 thorn from their tether source, which will break their tether, while the players linked with purple move directly clockwise 1 thorn from their source. This will have all players separated enough to avoid overlap of any of the blue explosions, while also satisfying the requirements of the 4 tower absorbs. Once all blue tethers break and the 4 absorb towers resolve, we have all players run to the south side of the platform. The player tethered to the north thorn will run all the way south until their tether breaks. As this tether breaks and the north circle explodes, the raid will begin to rotate clockwise. Next, the player tethered to the east thorn will break, and this rotation continues until all 4 purple tethers are broken. Healers, be sure to top everyone off in between these tether explosions. The boss will again cast Ultimate Impulse to mark the end of Act 4, and you'll want to make sure all tethers have been broken fast enough for the debuffs to fall off before this cast goes off, or you will die. Don't forget to mitigate and heal through this damage. This is followed by another searing stream. Healers, be ready. Next up, Acanthai Finale will begin. In this preview, 8 absorb towers will appear around the boss. When the boss casts Wraith of Thorns, 2 additional thorns will drop down on the platform that will each tether all damage dealers or all tanks and healers to it with the blue wind crystals. Players will have to stay close enough to this tether to avoid breaking it or you will die. To handle this, we have each role group run to the same side of the boss as their linked thorn and spread in that area. The boss will then begin to cast Fleeting Impulse, which will target each player in a random order with a large AoE circle and a 20-second magic vulnerability debuff. Each player is already spread appropriately in this configuration to avoid overlapping, so all they need to do during this time is identify which numbered attack they've been hit by. As soon as this attack begins, we count out loud with each hit so that every player can internalize what number they are. The timing here works out that once the 8th player is hit, the blue wind tethers will resolve and disappear. The boss will then cast Wreath of Thorns again, and tether to each absorb tower thorn in order clockwise starting from a random thorn. Players will then need to stand on these absorb towers in the order that they were hit by the Fleeting Impulse attack. If done in the proper order, players will have their magic vuln debuffs falling off at the perfect time for them to be able to take the appropriate absorb tower without dying. Once all 8 absorb towers have resolved, the boss will then cast another near or far sight double tank buster. Have the raid position appropriately to bait these correctly, and tanks, don't forget your cooldowns. There will be another searing stream to heal through, followed by another demigod double. We have our second tank immunity this hit as well. Finally, the boss will begin to cast Acanthai Curtain Call, and all players will be tethered to a thorn on the outside of the arena with a purple crystal. Each crystal will turn into a thorn and afflict their player with a thorn prick debuff of a specific timer, and players will need to break their tether before this timer expires or you will die. Furthermore, when the tether is broken, the player will deal high raid-wide damage with a magic vuln debuff, meaning tether breaks cannot be overlapped. To avoid overcomplicating a relatively simple mechanic, the debuff timer that each type of player receives always works out that we can have all damage dealers break their tether around 10 seconds left on their timer, while all tanks and healers break theirs at around 5 seconds left. Each tether takes a few seconds to break, so players can move out about 3 seconds before their assigned time to break. This will ensure that all players break their tether in time, while also giving healers enough time to heal in between each blast. While players are managing their tethers, the boss will periodically cast Hell's Sting, an alternating AoE cleave from him that will first attack the areas telegraphed, and then target the alternate unmarked sections for a second blast. This will deal high damage and apply damage down debuffs, and can be devastating if you're struggling with the Enrage. As such, players will need to move in between the telegraphs and then immediately move into those blasts to avoid the second round anytime this attack goes off. Players that are breaking tethers during this time will need to be especially careful here as well. Furthermore, to keep the boss in the center and this attack in a predictable location, we tank swap anytime the active tank needs to run out to break their tether, so that the boss does not move unnecessarily. Around the time that the last tether is broken, the boss will cast Ultimate Impulse, dealing even more raid-wide damage. Assign your mitigation here carefully to help out your healers. Another round of tethers will form, and players will be assigned a debuff timer once again. This is handled in the exact same manner as before, including the Hell Sting double dodge. One more Ultimate Impulse cast to heal through before the boss casts one final, slower Ultimate Impulse hard Enrage. You'll need to destroy the boss before this time, or you will die. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. See you again in 6.1. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.